Is the clash of civilizations inevitable? Is a clash of civilizations inevitable? Page 233, Benazir Bhutto asked the question. Is the clash of civilizations inevitable? Although many people believe the epic debate over the inevitability of a confrontation between Islam and the West was triggered by Samuel Huntington's essay in the journal Foreign Affairs in 1993. The battle of words and ideas on this issue has been raging within and outside the academy for a better part of a century. Actually, this was the critical question before us, for if the conflagration cannot be avoided, the world must prepare for it. But if the confrontation can be reconciled, we must exhaust all remedies to resolve it. The intellectual debate is represented by two separate and distinct schools. I've chosen to call those who believe in the inevitability of the conflict clashers, and those who believe the contrary, reconciliationist. Clearly, I'm a reconciliationist, and I'll outline a program of reconciliation later on in this book. But before we talk about a way out, it's important to examine the intellectual frameworks of both sides of the debate. The opening blow in the battle of ideas about the inevitability of the clash of civilizations was struck by Oswald Spengler in his opus, The Decline of the West, first published in 1918 at the conclusion of World War I. Spengler defines history by civilizations. He actually refers to them as cultures. This categorization has been made before, but it is Spengler's piece that is seen as the critical intellectual defining element of the debate. Spengler believed that there have been 8 high cultures in the history of human beings. He believed that the then current 1918 dominant culture in the world was Western. Spengler named it Faustian, which had begun 1,000 years before in Western Europe and had entered a state of decline. Spengler divided each dominant culture through history into 4 metaphoric seasonal stages of rise and decline. Spring is the beginning of a culture, the point of creation. Summer is the phase of a culture when civil society is created and critical thought develops. Autumn is the height of a culture's contribution and power. Finally, a culture crumbles in the winter when new critical thought runs dry and what Spengler calls irreligiosity takes over society. I believe there are 2 elements of Spengler's work that are important. Spengler made civilizations a term of reference for historical study. This is how others could later argue that civilizations defined history. This element is crucial to Huntington's argument and to the thrust of the entire Huntington school. Spengler's book became popular in the era immediately following World War I. Then after World War II, the thesis of his book that the decline of the West was underway seemed to be increasingly prescient. The 2 world wars seemed to reinforce Spengler's conclusions. Actually, Spengler's popularity after each of the world wars is comparable to the enormous revival of interest in the work of Samuel Huntington immediately after the attacks of September 11th, 2001, fully 8 years after his book, The Clash of Civilizations, was first published. Although Arnold Toynbee was writing at the same time as Spengler, his multi-volume Grand Review, a study of history, was not completed until 1961. Toynbee's work continues and amplifies the civilization-based approach to history that Spengler put forward. His view is that the downfall of a civilization comes when the creative minority simply stops producing good ideas and becomes satisfied to rule in an unjust manner. At that point, the creative minority becomes merely a dominant minority and precipitates the decline of that culture's dominance. Like Spengler, Toynbee argues that civilizations rise and fall in cycles, naming 23 civilizations through history that conform to his theory. Toynbee is important to us because he continues to develop the theory of civilization-based history. His work had a massive popular following. He was on the cover of Time magazine in 1947, and thus his theories became similarly popularized, despite the fact that his work was criticized by scholars for being too based in Christian morality rather than on historical fact. Nevertheless, his work helped set the stage for the intellectual developments of the more specific clashers who would follow him. The class academic who shaped the school most directly was Bernard Lewis, a prominent scholar of the Middle East and Islam. Lewis wrote the 1990 article, The Roots of Muslim Rage, in which he actually coined the term the clash of Civilizations, which would later gain prominence from Huntington's article by that name. Lewis believes that Muslim countries have tried Western economic and political models, but that the result has been poverty and tyranny. It is quite rational, then, for Lewis to conclude that not only do Muslims reject the models of the West as universal systems, but they will continue to reject them. He believes that Muslims have a major problem with Western ideas of secularism and modernism. Both are seen as having negatively transformed the Muslim world over the past century by destroying its values and social structures. The United States and the West are seen as responsible for these twin evils, and thus are legitimate targets for those in the Muslim world who believe in confrontation, not cooperation. It should by now be clear that we are facing a mood and a movement far transcending the level of issues and policies and the governments that pursue them. This is no less than a clash of civilizations, the perhaps irrational but surely historic reaction of an ancient rival against our Judeo-Christian heritage, our secular present, and the worldwide expansion of both. It is crucially important that we, on our side, should not be provoked into an equally historic but also equally irrational reaction against the rival. That rival, the class school, found its strongest advocate and most renowned theorist and a professor who taught at Harvard while I studied there in the early 1970s. Samuel Huntington published A Clash of Civilizations with a question mark in the journal Foreign Affairs in the summer of 1993. The essay set off a firestorm of interest. Madrid, train tracks in Madrid, March 11th, 2004.